Our main talk today is also done by an Oasis, not an outside guest speaker today, but someone from our community. Aaron shared this idea with me a while back. I thought it would make a fantastic topic for a talk. Aaron's done a few talks, community moments, and a main talk for us in the past. It'd be good to have him back with us again. I'm going to turn it over to our good friend Aaron Prazan for the 5-foot bookshelf.
Okay, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2. Everybody, you came. Thank you. So, so the 5-foot bookshelf. First I want to say, the last time I talked to you all, I talked about poetry, right? And I tried to say that we have the opportunity in reading, especially old stuff that's been around for a while, it's been sort of vetted by knowledgeable experts, to have the same sort of, spiritual food situation that, people get from sacred texts, right? And I gave examples of themes in Sandberg's poetry that, were important to humanists, right? Concern for the poor, situation encountered by minorities, women, children, inequality, that sort of thing, the workers, right? And I said that's something that you all have access to, and I didn't say that's what we ought to organize around, but we all have access to it, right? So today I want to talk about a different sort of set of texts. And I want to preface this, I'm an engineer, at least sort of, and I have training as an engineer. I did not have a liberal arts degree. I'm not a historian, a philosopher, or any of those things. So we're not going to go real deep into these things, right? But I want to talk a little bit about something that's called the 5-foot shelf, and why it might be important to talk about the classics and to read the classics once in a while. So, and I tried to put as many nude women in okay? So, that's the goddess Veritas. Veritas is the goddess of truth. Obviously, she has an orb of light that sheds, that reveals the truth. Anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is classic. What is this 5-foot shelf that you keep talking about? Some lessons, although we might not get too many examples due to time, from the classics and criticism of this collection in particular, and practical applications. This is an engineering talk after all. So it cannot be only theoretical. So what is a classic? So just give me some, what do you guys think is a classic? What's something that makes something a classic?
It's timeless.
Timeless? Anybody else?
It's
old. Universal appeal.
Benchmark standard.
Yeah. There's some things that they make something a classic.
Something you remember.
Something that is memorable, right? Right. So we're hitting on a lot of the things, right? What makes a particular? Yeah. So this is the only animated portion. Right? So it's got to be old. So why does it need to be old? When we talk about like the best books of last year, you're going to have like the top 10, top 50, top 100, right? You talk about the best books of the 90s or the 2000s. You're going to have the top 10, top 50, top 100. Now, if you say the best books of like the 19th or 20th century, right? You have top 10, top 50, top 100. If I said the best books published in the first millennium, still going to have top 10, top 50, top 100, right? Maybe you have more, right? But you continue to distill down, right? 1,000 years from now, what books that we read today are still going to be in print, right? Like of all the books you read in your lifetime, how many of them that are not 3,000 years old will be still in print if we're still around, right?
Stranger in a Strange Land?
Maybe, right? Maybe. Maybe. that picture in here? Maybe, but that's why it's got to be old, right? That's why anything that's, not that old can't really be considered a classic because it hasn't really been durable over time and space. It's got to be fundamentally important, right? It's got to be something that, and that goes along with being old. If something is 300, 500 years old and it's not fundamentally important, then it's obsolete and nobody cares, right? It's got to be beautiful, memorable, right? I don't know if Herodotus had a lot of competitors when he was being a historian in Greece, right? Probably not. It probably wasn't like, a bestsellers list of historians, and he just happened to rise to the top. But if the presentation was not made in a really masterful, quality way, then it wouldn't still be in print 1,000 years later, right? 1,000 years later. That's just mind-boggling. And actually, Herodotus is 2,500 years later, right? So it's got to be really good. And there's this guy, Italo Calvino. He wrote a book about why someone should read the classics, and he had a bunch of reasons. And he had this book. The classic is a book which, even when we read it for the first time, gives a sense of rereading something we've read before. And that's because all the stuff that we know about is sort of like based on some symbol that somebody wrote down, that like Shakespeare described. And the stuff that he described is based on things that he knew about, that goes back and back and back. The real classics are like the origin of that, right? So it's got to be really memorable, and then it will resonate throughout all time. And it's got to be complex because so you can keep coming back to it, right? Classics, everyone wants to have read, but no one wants to read. It's probably true these days. So, what is this 5-foot shelf? We kind of talked about a little bit what's a classic, right? 5-foot shelf is an edition of classics compiled by the president of Harvard. Does anybody here go to Harvard? Did anybody go to Harvard? No Harvards. Other Ivy Leagues. We had a Northeastern parent, which is good. So I didn't go to Harvard, but I went to a school down the street from Harvard, and I knew a bunch of Harvard people. We had a consortium in ROTC. All the naval officers to be were from Harvard and from a couple other schools in Boston. We all kind of were in the same club there. And Harvard people are different, right? When they said, give us a reading, we would have a stranger and a stranger. And they would bring like a rhyme of the ancient mariner, right? I was like, wow. They were different. But this guy, Charles Eliot, who's the president, and you look at the years that he was president of Harvard, 40 years, it's got to be like the most tumultuous time for education in America, like ever, until now, until we have this big explosion of the massive online courses and the innovations that are happening now. It may not be centered around Harvard. They may be centered around some of the more technical universities because it's so, because it's a technological innovation. Although I'm sure Harvard's online courses are amazing, right? I know Yale's are, not to create a rivalry or anything. That time of change from 1869 to 1909, right? We go from this rural society full of sort of self-educated or home-educated yeoman farmers who are educating themselves on these books, on the classics. You have this image of like Abraham Lincoln reading by candlelight in his log cabin, right? You have, if you read about the founding fathers, they didn't have a lot of education, or if they did, they only had a couple years at Harvard or somewhere, and then the rest of their, because they're Boston, the rest of their, time is like spent learning themselves. Like, Thomas Jefferson, he's like obsessed with learning, but he didn't like, go to the Sorbonne and spend 20 years at Oxford. He kind of like, he's American, he did it on his own, right? But if he did it by reading these books, right? By reading the classics, by reading Socrates, and well, at that time, what now we consider the classic scientific writings were current, right? The British Royal Society stuff. But we had this culture, this yeoman farmer sort of doing it themselves, or if you were rich enough, getting your kid educated that same way. And in that 40 years, we transitioned to this industrial society where everyone's in the city and they're working, there's all these immigrants, and there's this huge disparity now between rich and poor. There's a lot less farmers. It's like the Gilded Age, right? There's just a huge difference from the agrarian society we had before the industrial age. Right? And he's looking at education over this period. He's like, man, this is really changing. And he realized those works are still accessible. They're still accessible to everyone. They're just not being accessed the same way. Even though there's more people and more printing involved, there's less probably study happening. And he, at the same time, he's defining what it means to be educated. He's raising the bar at Harvard. I mean, this guy, just imagine. So first, he abolished mandatory chapel at Harvard, which was like the first time. Right? And he established the business school. He established the graduate school. Can you imagine Harvard not having a graduate school? He established Radcliffe College. Before that, no women allowed, right? Radcliffe College is before Harvard was co-ed, had a women's college, so separate. He established this. He also made the medical school from like a trade school, or like, it was like a 2-year program, right? To learn how to chop off limbs, to a 4-year postgraduate, medical school that we now think of as medical school, right? He did a lot of other things. He was really revolutionary. And at the very last year of his tenure, 1909, he had been lecturing about this, and Collier's, a publisher, said, hey man, you give us a list, we'll publish it under the Harvard moniker, and they did. And they sold 200,000 copies of this thing. Not thing, 51 volume collection. They sold 200,000 copies, which is huge at that time. And it's a collection of works from the Enlightenment back to the beginning of history. And it is called the Harvard Classics, and it was nicknamed the 5-foot shelf because he used to say that you can get a liberal arts education from a shelf 5 feet long. So that's what it is. The subjects are broad: history, poetry, prose, travelogues, and sagas are big because if you're a Virginia farmer and you've only been to the next county, you have the opportunity to learn about the rest of the world, right? And both how it is and how it imagines itself to be. Sacred texts, poetry, politics, government, philosophy, education. These are the types of core things. And I want to say that the classical education is all of those things. Because now a lot of the liberal arts education is like one of those things. Like I'm doing women's studies, or I'm going to only study, sociology or something. The classical education is, no, you don't actually focus on it. You focus on all of them, which is a little different than the way we do things now. I don't mean to denigrate women's studies. So it's liberal, meaning free, not in the political sense. The idea is you're creating a person who can sort of continue the achievements of the Enlightenment, can continue the achievements and continue the greatness that America had at that time and that Western society had achieved at that time in comparison to like prior, the Dark Ages, right? That reading the classics creates a suitable foundation for that. And it's sort of like this transition from uneducated masses and educated rulers to more educated masses and elected rulers, continues the trend, right? And keeps us from going backwards. And I think that's still true today. And the goal was having, like I said, broad knowledge of all those subjects and the ability to think inductively about those subjects. Which is kind of ironic because one of the authors in the collection is Hume, and Hume wrote that you cannot find truth through inductive reasoning, that it must be deductive. And that means, the scientific method. You must test with evidence your arguments. And that's been very successful, right? And now we're getting to the point, I think, in society, where we're able to test with evidence things that we could not test before. With big data, right? We're able to do like psychological tests on millions and millions of people, right? Where we were not able to do that before. But inductive reasoning is sort of the opposite. Inductive reasoning is not taking an idea and then testing it. Inductive reasoning is taking a set of facts and then making a prediction, a generalization based on those facts. And you can do these empirical tests, right? If you have the time, but there's a lot of decisions that you really can't make deductively, and those are the decisions that we impart to reason, to wisdom. You can't make a deductive decision on whether to trust someone, right? In face to face, you can't. I mean, maybe if you're Sherlock Holmes and you have this sort of, all this evidence that you gathered with your nostrils and eyes in 10 seconds, but you don't, right? Most people don't, right? You have to make inductive reasoning, and the same thing like battlefield decisions. We're getting to the point where we probably have enough data on the battlefield to really, with all the intel and the SIGINT and all of the number crunching, we probably can make deductive battlefield decisions and say with certainty that this will be better than that. But a lot of it is just gut, and that gut is wisdom, right? Hopefully. And this broad foundation of history and broad understanding of human nature is something that you can get from studying the classics. And maybe you're natural, maybe you're all natural and have that already, but I don't. So that's why we study the classics. Now I have some examples, and I don't know how much time. I've got about maybe 10 minutes, so I probably won't do all of these examples. But I'll pick a couple here. Maybe, I got a lot out of Franklin's biography. I read it a couple times. I read these other ones too, but I'll bring the examples from that. So firstly, Franklin's a young man. This, incidentally, is the very first volume of the Harvard Classics. It's the Franklin's autobiography. And I know that it's been mentioned in the last month by at least 2 other Oasis speakers, so I figured I should. So Franklin's a young man, and he's kind of feeling his oats. And he's trying to educate himself, because he didn't really have a chance to go to college that much. While I was intent on improving my language, I met with an English grammar. I think it was Greenwood's, at the end of which there were 2 little sketches on the arts and rhetoric of logic, the latter finishing with a specimen of a dispute in the Socratic method. So he's reading the dialogues of Plato, right? And soon after, I procured Xenophon's Memorable Things of Socrates, wherein there are many instances of the same method. I was charmed with it, adopted it, dropped my abrupt contradiction and positive argumentation, and put on the humble inquirer and doubter. And being then, from reading Shaftesbury and Collins, who are a couple of moralists and religious skeptics, became a real doubter in the many points of our religious doctrine. I found this method safest for myself and very embarrassing against those whom I used it. Therefore, I took a delight in it, practiced, and continuously grew, very artful and expert, drawing people even of superior knowledge into concessions and consequences of which they did not foresee, entangling them in difficulties out of which they could not extricate themselves, and so obtaining victories that neither myself nor my cause always deserved. So he's becoming a smart ass. Okay, so that's not the lesson from the classics. I continued this method some few years, and gradually left it, retaining only the habit of expressing myself in terms of modest diffidence, never using when I advance anything that may be possibly disputed the words certainly, undoubtedly, or any other that give the air of positiveness to an opinion, but rather say, I conceive, or I apprehend a thing to be so, or it appears to me, or I should think it so for such and such reasons. I imagine it to be so if I am not mistaken. And this habit, I believe, has been of great advantage to me. And when I have on occasion to inculcate my opinions and persuade men into measures that I have been from time to time engaged in promoting, and as the chief ends of conversation are to inform or be informed, to please or persuade, I wish well-meaning, sensible men would not lessen their power of doing good by a positive, assuming manner that seldom fails to disgust, tends to create opposition, to defeat every one of those purposes for which speech was given us, to wit, giving or receiving information or pleasure. So he's sort of learning diplomacy. Right? He's saying, I learned how to be an inquisitor. I learned how to use gentle language. And by example, the rest of his life, he goes back to this over and over and over again. It's how he managed to establish the first subscription and then the first public libraries in America, how he managed to establish the post office, how he managed to negotiate agreements with the rich to agree to be taxed in the United States, and how he managed to get the first militia and defensive fort built in Philadelphia by no one would fund it, so he created a lottery. He said, maybe this will work, and it was funded in a week. He learned how to sort of be gentle, and he got a lot of stuff done. I'm sure our diplomats are very good at diplomacy, but I kind of took that as something that I need to read on a weekly basis, right? To sort of gentle my relations. So this is the type of thing you can you read 15 minutes a day and get something like that. Get ideas out of even short passages, because most of these works are rather short. That really sort of create a searching, reasoning mindset more than the day's news on. I'll do a little bit about Crito. We talked about Socrates. So Crito is Socrates' best friend. And Crito comes to Socrates the day before he's about to be killed. He's 70 years old, he's in prison. And I'm telling you, you think, oh, Plato, this guy is so hard. Just difficult to read and boring. And I'm telling you, it's like a Kevin Smith movie. Or it's like this sort of back and forth banter. It's basically these dialogues. They're kind of funny. Socrates, why have you come to me this hour, Crito? Is it not still early? Crito, yes, very early. About what time is it? It's just daybreak. I wonder that the jailer was willing to let you in. He knows me now, Socrates. I come here so often. Besides, I gave him a tip. It's just goofy, right? But later on, they have this long conversation, not in this one, but in the symposium, about how much to drink tonight, because I'm still sore from last night. So then they get down to business. Crito says, man, I can get you out of jail. I got money, my friends got money, I can get you into a different country, we can live a life of luxury, you can be good. Don't die. We all love you and want you to stick around. We're amazed by you. Stay. And Socrates says, no. He says, no. And that's what this dialogue is about. Socrates says, he says, my dear Crito, if your anxiety to save me be right, it's most valuable. But if not, the greater it is, the harder it will be to cope with. We must reflect then whether we are to do as you say, for I am still what I have always been, a man who will accept no argument, but that which on reflection I find to be truest. I cannot cast aside my former arguments because this misfortune has come to me. And he said, damn it, Socrates, I can get you out here. We've got to do this. And so he starts his little Socratic method. He starts asking questions. Do you think it would be okay to do this? What about that? And finally, he says, do you agree that we ought never to act unjustly? Certainly not. If we ought never to act unjustly at all, ought we to repay injustice with injustice as the multitude thinks we may? Certainly not. Well then, Crito, ought we do evil to anyone? Certainly not, I think, Socrates. And is it just to repay evil with evil as the multitude thinks, or unjust? Certainly it's unjust. For there is no difference, is there, between doing evil to a man and acting unjustly? True. Then we ought not to repay injustice with injustice, or to do harm to any man, no matter what we may have suffered from him. Now, does that smack familiar? Now keep in mind, this is written 430 BC. But this is the golden rule, right? We ought not to repay injustice with injustice or do harm to any man, no matter what we may have suffered from him. Actually, it's a more specific and better stated version of the golden rule, right? And he goes on to say, to sort of personify the law, and basically say that if you are convicted unjustly, then to break the law is unjust. So to escape from prison is unjust. And that no matter what, that if you are convicted wrongly, it is the man who convicted you that, does the evil. But that you should not repay injustice with injustice by escaping it. He should, suffer his consequences. And I don't know if I agree with that, especially now, right? With all of our laws that seem kind of unjust, right? And he makes allowances for that, right? He gives examples of where breaking or not breaking the law, but sort of challenging the law is appropriate, right? But this thing is 10 pages long. This little conversation between him and Credo, and I've read it 5 or 6 times in the last week, and it just seems so important. It seems so fundamental. It seems so basic, and I think if we take the opportunity to meditate on these things, we can get a lot out of it. The last thing I'll leave you with is the funny stuff, just because that's the way it is. So Franklin, because I don't want to go through all these, it would take a long time. So Franklin early on was a vegetarian. He had read some classic stuff that sort of suggested that vegetarianism was, healthy. And he lived it for a long time. People thought he was nuts, and he realized that he was spending half the amount of money on food that his brother was, and he was amassing all his wealth. It was like, oh, great, he loved it. And so then he's like on a ship coming back to New York. He said, I believe I have admitted mentioning that in my first voyage from Boston, being becalmed off Block Island, our people set about catching cod and hauled upon a great many. Hitherto, I had stuck to my resolution of not eating animal food, and on this occasion I considered with my master Tryon the taking of every fish as a kind of unprovoked murder, since none of them had or ever could do us any injury that might justify the slaughter. All this seemed very reasonable, but I had formerly been a great lover of fish, and when this came hot out of the frying pan, it smelled admirably well. I balanced some time between principle and inclination until I recollected that when the fish were opened, I saw smaller fish taken out of their stomachs. And I thought, well, if you eat one another, I don't see why I mayn't eat you. So I dined upon cod very heartily and continued to eat with other people, meaning the meat eaters. Returning only now and then occasionally to a vegetable diet. So convenient a thing it is to be a reasonable creature, since it enables one to find or make a reason for everything one has a mind to do. It's not without entertainment value as well. And even there's more, Marcus Aurelius, but there's some funny stuff here. I don't have time to go through it all right now. So there's criticisms of this. There's like 1,600 works, books, histories, essays, lectures, poems, blah, blah, blah. There's like almost no women in the whole. There's 23 poems. And I'm talking like, not epic sagas, one-pagers out of 51 volumes. And I think that's a problem. I said earlier about Sandburg, you can, if you get a volume of Sandburg's poetry, you can be manly, you can feel manly. But I think maybe the classics make you kind of a little too manly because they don't have enough women's voices. Gay works are well represented by contrast, although they don't say so. But they are well represented by contrast. As a matter of fact, in Plato, he has a whole dialogue devoted to arguing between the relative merits between sort of traditional love and homosexual love. And I don't know who wins that argument, but it's just those are well represented. There's also not a lot of non-Western, when I say non-Western, non-European American authors. not very well represented, although there are more of those than women. Like the Bhagavad Gita is in there, and, you know, the Quran is in there, portions of it, and other, you know, books about the voyages. There's a lot of travelogues that talk about the English and French voyages to different places and what those cultures are like. There's not a lot of original material from Asia, but it's more than the women. The women are really left out, so that's a criticism. Practical instructions. So these books are really available. They're really easy to get. There's new translations. Like I said, most of these are still in print, and you can pay a lot of money to get new translations. But they're all in the public domain. Is the word I'm looking for. They're free. You can pay for them if you want. There's tons of people that will allow you to pay for them, but you can get them for free. Even audio versions are free. And the original hardbound, you know, like the ones on my first slide, are also pretty easily available on eBay, or you might even be able to find them on a used bookstore, but if you have space. But there's a couple of websites, archive.org, bartleby.com. There's others. There's even an app that'll give you 15 minutes worth of reading, you know, every day. You can read the entire Harvard Classics in a year. I looked at that app when I first got this idea, and then when I looked for it again, I couldn't find it, but I know it's out there. So you can get to it if you want to. But you know, it's definitely available. And I don't know that many of you will be as inspired. I said that last time, 50% of you will want to read a poem when I'm done. I don't know if I've reached that level. I might be at the 12, you know, 13% level. But I guarantee you that if you pick up a classic, you'll be surprised. So that's all I have. That's the end of my thing.